All right, so if we are going to continue talking about materials, like really talking about materials, we have to bring in rendering, and we have not talked about rendering yet. So here goes. Disclaimer number one, this is only going to be using the regular Maya renderer. If we get access to Arnold, at any point I will do a video on that. But generally, when it comes to rendering, it's extremely complex because what we have happening is, if I bring up my lights for a second, what we have to do is properly like measure, and if these lights hit this object and then that light bounces off of here, and how does that light diffuse throughout this material, and how does this reflect these other things, and there's so many calculations involved, and it's taking the geometry which we have built, which is what you've been doing all semester, um, wrapping this particular material around that geometry, and then bouncing lights off of all of these various pieces of geometry and how that light interacts with each other. It's a lot, and a lot can go wrong, and it's very, very, very technical. So here's one of the things we're going to look at. First of all, this viewport right here, there's actually a thing where it says renderer, and you have two different ones. Viewport 2.0 is what we use when we're using the Maya renderer. If we were using Arnold, we would use this one, and it would completely change how things work. It actually brings up this, and I can press play, and it would like show me in here what the Arnold thing was looking like. However, that's going to take a long time, and I don't want to freeze my computer, so we're not going to do that. We're going to go back to viewport 2.0. But that is one of the ways in which the Arnold renderer works. If we want our render options, we have to go from our modeling menu into our rendering menu. And FYI, there's a lighting shading menu where all of those right-click, add a new material things are all in there. But we're going to render, and we're going to render settings. All right. Now I haven't, anytime I do something like this, I'll probably have a video that's like, these are my exact settings that we're using for today. But within this, you can name a file. Theoretically, you can choose a file type. So far, I've had bad luck with getting mine to actually shift to a JPEG. Maybe we'll try a TIFF. But IFF is the Maya file type. Let's see. So we scroll down, renderable cameras. So right now, perspective is the only camera we have in here, but you may have other cameras at some point. Or it's the only perspective, like real camera. But you might have other cameras set up. So if you are going through your perspective camera, but then you see something else render, that's why. The alpha channel will, anywhere where there's nothing, like in my background, it would make that an alpha channel, so you could composite this somewhere else. Most things we render, you probably have some kind of background, except for maybe the sky in the far distance. But if you don't have that clicked on, then it's just going to give you like gray nothing. If we needed the depth, we could hit render it, but we're not using that. Frame range, if you have animation, this is where you set how much of it actually renders. So you don't want to render more than you need. And then image size, there are different presets. Usually if I'm making a video, I'm going to stick with something kind of smaller. HD 540 refers to the height, which is half of what a standard television is at this point. So standard TVs are 1080. So the word HD here is, I don't know why that's there. This is not high definition by any stretch of the imagination. However, the more pixels you have, the longer it takes. So if you're doing test renders, put them at half size, at least work out the major problems without wasting too much of your time. And then when you're done, you can put it to, 1920 by 1080, something like that. But for the most part, what I'm doing in here, it's going to be a little bit smaller. And so these are the like general, no matter what kind of renderer you use, settings, you need to worry about these settings, right? So if you change from Arnold or from Maya Software to Arnold or to something else, these are settings you'd still have to look at. Now, there's another tab right here, it says Maya Software. These options will change drastically depending on what type of renderer you use, and there's a lot of different renderers out there and different studios use different ones. And so while I can talk generally about things we're doing, I can't tell you that like, oh, multi-pixel filtering, use this setting because that's what they use. No, um, there's no set settings. They're just lots of technical concepts that change drastically depending on what you're doing. Typically speaking, with a lot of these, the higher the number, the more time it takes. The more the lever goes to the right, the more time it's going to take. For example, under quality, you can do a preview quality, low shading. There's none of the other stuff even available. Oh, we're going to ignore this for a second. All of these settings don't even exist. Anti-aliasing along the edges is set to very low. And then there's intermediate, and then there's production. If you're looking to render something that has animation as a test sequence, then yeah, preview quality could probably be fine because you want to see what the character looks like, not in a play blast, but like you don't need to know what the lighting is doing. Not really. For our purposes in here, though, if we're rendering, we're probably testing lighting. We're probably testing materials. And if we're testing lighting and materials, well, then we need to deal with higher quality stuff. So I tend to put mine to production quality. One of the things that happens if you're looking at objects and the objects themselves are not looking very great, forget shadows, that's a different story. Forget reflections, that's a different story. But if the objects themselves, the shading on the objects, like this shading here, this over here, if it's looking very smudgy or blurry or noisy, number of samples, you can start to turn these up. This would give you more detail. Again, higher numbers, more render time. And all of this has to do, you can see this is all under one giant thing called anti-aliasing quality. This is your edges. This is the edges between things. So we can turn this up. There we go. Twirl that down a little bit. So under this next one, ray tracing quality. First of all, you have to turn this on. By default, it doesn't turn on. So if you're rendering stuff and you're like, there's no reflectivity, ray tracing. There's no good shadows, ray tracing. Ray tracing is the act of literally bouncing the light around. So I turn on ray tracing, and the default is 10, 10, 10 for everything. You will note that 10 for shadows is considered not as high as 10 for these other things. I think the highest you can go on all of these is 32. Like there is a limit. And it's basically how many times will the reflection bounce, how many times will the shadow be measured. Again, higher numbers mean higher render time. If you don't have any translucent material where there's refractions happening, then it won't even do this, I don't think. There are some other settings in here that deal more with animation that we're not getting to. Motion blur. So if things are moving fast, you can turn on a motion blur. This is very render heavy, very expensive. Another way to put that. Very costly in time and output. And other very specific things. I've been looking at these today. I don't think I'm going to change any of these though. And actually, we can, unfortunately, I'm looking to see if there's any reset settings. Import render. Okay, here we go. We can go to default render settings. There we are. So if I go to default render settings, turns everything down to preview quality. We're going to bring that up, and we're going to turn on ray tracing. I want to make sure I'm in the same spot that you were all in. But yes, we can reset things. And then when it actually comes time to render, let me turn this back to a TIFF. When it comes time to render, we want to actually break open a render view. So we've got a little eyeball or this IPR render. Either one will bring you what you're looking for. That rendered rather fast. Runtime error, something, something, something. Who the heck knows? There we go. It was opening up the previous render. That's why it was so fast. Because see, my camera has moved. It's very unhelpful. So we're going to reset this. If you want to know what your render is actually going to look like, you can go to View, Camera Settings, Resolution Gate. And this will show you exactly what's going to get rendered. I will not be using this because it cuts, when I do the videos, it cuts off too much of the picture. So I go back to no gate, and you can't see what I'm doing. So I'm just going to have to guess. Now that we have widescreen things, it's this viewport on here mirrors pretty closely to what would actually be rendered. But what's nice about this is you leave it up, and then you can press this button again and it will re-render based on the new camera placement, or it will re-render based on, a setting you just changed. It will tell you how long it takes to render once it's done. So this one took 12. I'll be honest, I'm not sure if that's 12 seconds, or I don't know what that means, because it didn't feel like 12 seconds, but it felt like more than 12 frames. It tells me what size it is, if I'm zoomed in or not, because you can in fact zoom in. Now remember, this is a bitmap image, so if, like, zooming in eventually doesn't make any, sense. You will notice on mine that the reflections look very nice and the shadows look okay. That's on purpose. In order to get the shadows looking nicer, I'd have to turn a lot of settings up, and then it would cost a fortune to, whoops. I need to recenter this. Come on. It would cost me basically a lot of time to get everything to look that nice. So rather than waste your time with waiting for things to render, we're going to do something else. Now, I've rendered that out. So I'm going to select something in here, and I'm going to randomly just make a change. That didn't change anything. I guess it did. There we go. Just to make a change. One of the things you can do in here, though, if you don't want to wait for the whole image to change and you're not sure what the change is really going to look like, maybe it's not this obvious, you can drag select a certain area, and it's going to create this little red box, and then you click this button, and it's only going to re-render that. And so now you can see, oh, no, we don't want that, right? And undo whatever it is you just did. There it is. Or you can, let's see here. Another thing you can do is we can keep a couple images in a row. So I can press this button right here, the one that doesn't have the X, and say keep image. And then I can make a change to this. There it is. And I can re-render based on that new setting. And you can see that there's like a, there's now I forget what this is called, but basically you now know that there's multiple things in here, like a scroll bar. That's what it's called. And so I can old, new. So the one on the right is, or if you scroll down here to the right, you will get the old one. And now we can see the new one. So this one right here goes from like metal to plastic. Metal, plastic. And so you can compare a couple different things. And if you want to really, really, really save something, like for realsies, because right now these are just existing who knows where, I can say File, Save Image. Particularly, I can go to this little box right here. I can say Raw Image. Not very many options. So I can say Apply and Closed. And I'm going to go Open a folder and find the image. So it definitely didn't save properly. So I go File, Save Image without going to the box, and it actually brings up something that asks me where I want it to go. I've been rendering other stuff in here, so there's all these different folders from other renders, but I can say JPEG. JPEGs are nice. And then I can say metal test, and that should, there it is, come up as a JPEG to be viewed at your convenience anywhere else. And actually, it looks a little well, how very interesting. It looks different outside the viewer, because of course it does. It's a different file type. So in here, I'm probably looking at an IFF. It doesn't even tell me. And also the Photoshop viewer, whatever this is going to be making things look different too. So this is another one of the problems with renderers. There's probably all channels, there's probably different settings going on in here that are trying to make it look different. So until you save it out and actually take a real look at at things, you won't always know exactly what it's going to look like. I'm actually going to go looking for that setting. Give me 1 second. Found it. So if we look at, if I bring up that image again, this is why we have projects, so you can find your images pretty easily. You can see I've got a much closer look now. There is a gamma setting in here that is changing, it's like altering it to like see it better. And then I turn it off and I can see what the thing actually looks like, or at least very, very, very close to it. Much closer. Oh wait, this is an old one. Uh, it would help if I test 2. It would help if I actually compared apples to apples. I forgot I made a couple changes. Test 2. Yeah, there it is. All right, so this is a little bit sharper than this one, but it's still the darkness is there. And unfortunately, because this is a viewer, there's always going to be some minor changes, which is why we save things, which is why yeah, the exposure is a little bit different. Every program is going to interpret these images differently anyways. So turning up the gamma allows you to see your shadows, but then you have to turn this off in order to see what the image will actually output as, which tells me I need more lights. Which means I now need to bring up my outliner, wherever the heck that ended up, Windows, outliner. And I've been promising to use this more often because I should. And then I can turn this up a wee little bit and then turn this up a little bit. And take another picture, see how that works. Because once you get into really rendering stuff, your viewport becomes unreliable. That's a good way to put it. The other thing we're going to go over is in another video, if I put it back on this, is it going to light up the room? All right, so that'll be in one of the next videos when we get to more like ray tracing and stuff like that.